Okay, good afternoon to everybody out there. Welcome to our very first Lunch and Learn. We are very excited to be bringing this type of presentation to you today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kirsty Trevor. I'm the Events and Sponsorship Officer with SCA Queensland. I'll begin this session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Yarragara country on which I'm hosting this webinar from today. And I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining us today. I would also like to acknowledge our education support sponsors, those being Macquarie Bank, Altogether, Stratamax, Grace Lawyers, BCB, Hum Energy and Express Glass. Today we will be hearing from Jason Carlson, Simon Bernard and Con Archimedes. I hope I pronounced that right, Con. And they will be chatting through everything about the CIA, I'm getting it all backwards, the conference in Dallas. Over to you guys.
Thank you. Con, are you okay to start off? I think he may be having some technical issues.
No, I think he's staring very intently at a sandwich or something.
Yeah.
He's really in the lunch component of this Lunch and Learn.
Con, can you hear us okay?
He's just in shock, remembering what happened in Dallas. Lost for
Is he
words.
still there? He might still be there. Kirsty, do you want to move to the international panel slide? And I'll start off with that one, and then we'll come back to Con when he's got his technical things. So some of the takeaways, there was an international panel that I was quite humbled to be invited to, amongst other members, of which we had was representatives from Panama, the United Arab Emirates, from Spain, from obviously Australia with myself, and Colombia. So there was a number of questions put to us prior, and I engaged with SCA to assist with making sure that I was delivering what the issues are in Australia. But one of the main questions the panel looked at was what is one of the most important issues facing condominiums, community strata in your country. And it was actually, I suspected there would be some similarities, and there was a little bit, but there was a couple of standout surprises from around the world. Certainly with Panama, she's also a lawyer and also a community manager in Panama, but new laws and lack of understanding of those laws, I was a little surprised that some of the European countries certainly have newer legislation, or definitely newer legislation in Queensland, but certainly newer legislation around communities, and actual communities are fairly new in those countries. A real standout from Jivan from the United Emirates, or Dubai. In 2019, they had laws that changed that actually stopped owners electing their own board, so their own committee, if you like. The regulator in Dubai now has stepped in and upped their involvement in community, and they now choose the board that will run that particular community scheme. I found that really interesting, and it appears that the regulator in that country, for whatever reason, is starting to step into these communities more and more. One of the biggest issues facing Spain was actually what they call delinquency, so our arrears. It's something that we probably haven't heard here for a while, but there's a real trend around housing costs. They've gotten so bad that it's a massive issue that owners just simply can't afford or aren't paying their fees or their dues for those particular buildings and lots. The cost of living is heavily contributing to this in Europe, in particular, obviously, with the situation in Ukraine, their gas prices somewhat exposed over here in Australia as well, but they've gone through the roof. The issue there as well is that it's the manager that bills those gas prices or bills the gas usage, as well as issues the levies for the cost of providing that community. So that was very interesting out of Spain. I think Colombia was the same across all countries. There was this represented common theme that the knowledge of newly introduced laws around the community living. And these are very much still new concepts in Panama. Something that Pepe from Spain, who loves his technology, he then had ChatGPT up on the screen. It was a very interactive session. He asked the same question of ChatGPT, and ChatGPT decided that one of the most important issues facing condominium communities is effective governance, which is exactly what these panelists had just said, and management. It's crucial to have a well-structured and transparent system that addresses maintenance, which is obviously a very big thing in Australia, financial management, conflict resolution that we all deal with each day, decision-making processes. This ensures the smooth operation and overall satisfaction of community members. So we could have canned the whole panel and just asked ChatGPT, because it certainly had the answers for us. Just moving on, I won't go through all the questions. There was a second question, and that was around innovations and technology that the world is seeing as a major impact on condominium and community management, or strata management in Australia. Certainly, I raised the emergence of the ChatGPT into strata management, certainly utilising that going forward versus balancing the human element of our jobs and what we do. It was very interesting, again, to hear out of the UAE or Dubai. They actually have a minister for artificial intelligence, and they're utilising numerous new technologies, and one of them is called a building management modelling. So prior to actually building a building in Dubai now, they do a 3D version of that building before construction to test the various scenarios of how weather would impact it, how certain services and infrastructure, how the use of, for instance, maybe the bin area or the people moving through that building, and they actually test it before they build it. Then once they've built it, they create a digital twin of that building. So then they can, as it's built, they can then ongoingly test solutions on the actual physical built version. So I did find that very, very interesting. So to summarise, I think the Condominium Community Association in Australia certainly faces the challenges of maintenance and repairs to ensure the safety and functionality of the properties. In Spain, the non-payment of community fees poses significant issues for condominium communities, affecting financial stability and hindering necessary maintenance. Condominiums in the UAE grapple with the management of service charges and maintenance fees, which are crucial for the upkeep and shared amenities and facilities. Innovations such as smart home automation, property management software, the Internet of Things, devices, chatbots, the potential to revolutionise condominium and community management practices. Management companies strive for success and profitability through streamlining operations, enhancing customer service, embracing technology, implementing effective marketing strategies, and strategic financial management and continuous learning. That is a summary of the international session and the international panel. And those last 5 points that I read out all came from ChatGPT as well. So if you have any questions, I think we're doing those at the end. But I might hand back to Con now, if he's online, to see if we can make this a little bit more exciting with some pretty pictures.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, mate.
Beautiful. Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. Finally, talk about technology. I'm not great at it, so we're online now. So I just wanted to, I suppose, talk a little bit about. I also went to the CAI conference in Dallas, but then went on to the multi-owned property international forum, research forum. So in Vancouver, where I suppose the interest from our perspective was around the buildings, communities, both in the US and in Vancouver. And I took some photos of a development or neighbourhood development, probably about the size of West End or South Brisbane, where developers are buying old houses and individual homes, knocking them over and building communities such as a combination of low-rise and high-rise apartment living. The interesting part for me around this was around construction. in Vancouver, they've got such a large quantity of timber. They use it to build condominiums and also standalone homes. It's basically out of timber, so the regulations over there, anything up to 6 stories can be built with timber frames, timber flooring. The flooring, you look at that first photo from each of the levels, it's compressed timber. It's supposed to have a fire rating of 2 hours between floors. So, between walls, but the floors, it's compressed to give the same fire rating as a concrete floor between levels. And, the interesting part about it, I suppose, is the cost, and that's one of the drivers. The cost for a timber floor is about 6 times less than concrete, because it's such. There's no shortage of timber over in Vancouver or in Canada. The other thing I suppose is interesting, and if we go through the slides, Kirsty, that's the finished product. So from the outside, it's got cladding. There's render, obviously. So when you're looking at it, it looks like a concrete building, but it clearly isn't. So we'll go to the next slide. And so these photos show, and this one's close to 6 stories or 6 stories. And you can see the fire separation, the concrete wall in between, in between the buildings. So that gives it a bit more fire separation. They all have, they have the same issues that we have in Australia by way of, water issues, building quality, defects, so they have the same issues as what we do. Nothing changes there. What they do though is, with strata managers or community managers, they don't generally arrange the insurance. What they have is insurance agents over there, and they start at the beginning of a development. They go through the insurance program with the community manager to make sure they have all the covers that are required, including any liability issues. They also, where we have, I think, standard excesses of around about $1,000 or $2,000 in the properties we insure over here. They choose to have a higher deductible, and the deductibles start from around about 20,000 and go up to upwards of $50,000 or $100,000 for any one loss. So effectively, the community self-insures for a lot of the attritional type claims, the day-to-day claims, and that keeps the premiums low. But when we're looking at premiums, they're charging about the same as what we're charging over here. However, the only difference is they've got a high deductible, so it cuts out a lot of the day claims. In these communities as well, and I suppose in Dallas we saw more of it. Their levies are structured. I'm not sure if Simon covered that off, but the levies are structured and they're very low compared to the levies in Australia. They also incorporate in those levies, because they're so large, the communities are so large, they incorporate things like entertainment budgets. They have entertainment budgets. One tour we did was around, I think, about 2,500, 3,000 lots. They had a budget of $300,000 per year to hold barbecues and hold events, concerts and things like that for the actual community. And then when we're talking about levies, the levies are very, minimal in that, they're roughly around about 100 US, 150 US a month. So I think it's, it contributes to the labour rate over there. So they got, a lower labour rate. So cheap labour. And so, it's sort of, but what they do try and I suppose work towards is bringing the community together. And from what we've seen, or from what I've seen, they do that really well. They have a lot of different programs to get community engagement and neighbourly engagement throughout their communities. So look, the size, it's when we look at number of schemes in the US, it's roughly around about 240,000 managed schemes, similar to Australia. However, you can see the scale of these, where we run at around about 9 or 10 lots per scheme. Over there, they run around about 100 lots per scheme. So it's on a bigger scale, but they seem to, they have the same issues, but they seem to bring the community, I think, better and closer together than what we experience here. So happy to answer any questions when they come up. So I'll pass over to Jason now.
Thanks, Con. Simon, Con and I were part of a delegation in Dallas at the CAI conference that we got bussed from Dallas downtown, where the conference was being held, thrown in bus. How long was the drive, guys? It felt like it was close to an hour to get to the outskirts of North Dallas, where we saw these strata communities. So it was a nice trip on a coach, and they took us to 2 strata communities on the outskirts. Each strata community had about 1,500 lots in them. So to give you a visual on size, those of you in Southeast Queensland, think Hope Island. Hope Island's about 1,500 lots, similar with Royal Pines. That was about the size of each of these strata communities. And just picking up on one of the points that Con made earlier, he was saying that their strata industry, and particularly the building industry over there, is dealing with the same issues that we are over here. But one of the points of difference that Con noticed was that they tend to build community a little bit better. Just picking up on that, when I went to the conference in Dallas, it was very, like, the topics that they were talking about, very similar to the topics that we see at SCA Queensland conferences and national conferences. Con and Simon, did you guys see the same from the sessions that you attended?
Yes.
Yeah, very much so, Jason.
Yeah, some of the sessions that I attended, one was on Airbnb, and like literally you could have just moved the room, put it in Queensland, and you wouldn't know any different other than the accents that everyone spoke in. They're all railing against Airbnb and talking about different strategies that they'd used to tackle it, and the disharmony that it was causing to long-term residential communities, the different ways that different local government areas in different states were regulating it. It was very close to home. And then I sat in on another session where it was just a whinge about clients, about how difficult committee members are. And I think they went through about 15 different personality types that you could attribute to committees. Like, for example, the axe grinder, the person that joins the committee just to have a whinge about one particular issue. And again, like if we had that session, like in Darwin, for example, at the SCA National Conference, it wouldn't have felt as though we were anywhere else, again, other than the accent. So even at the conference, in the industry, amongst the communities, they're all dealing with very similar issues. But the way in which they're approaching them is a little bit different. And I think that's reflective of the different cultures, which is what I'll get into now. So what you've got here are 2 photos of typical houses that we saw in both of these different strata communities that we visited. And my God, they look the same. 2 different communities that you see on the one on the left, 2 different houses, but very, very similar. So again, it was just very similar to what we see to large strata communities in Australia, like your Royal Pines, like your Hope Island, they had architectural standards that everyone had to build to. The way they did it at one of these strata communities was that someone would purchase the land, and then they'd have, I think it was a panel of 6 or 7 builders, wasn't it, guys? Like, you had to use one of the developers' pre-approved builders so that they could rigidly enforce the design and architectural standards there. When we visited them, each community had its own like head community manager. So they didn't call them strata managers or body corporate managers over there. They called them a community manager. And the impression that I got, and weigh in, Con and Simon, was that your community manager basically did everything, right? There didn't seem to be these split roles. Your community manager oversaw social events, entertainment events within the community. They oversaw the administration and the governance over there, and they also oversaw the facility and maintenance works that were getting done.
And one of the big things, Jason, is I think a point of difference to Australia, because the communities are so big. You know, there's certainly they go out to I think the largest one in Vegas or Nevada is 27,000 lots of houses of this size. So you're basically taking a management company like ours and plonking it on site. And what that does is they've got a community hall and a community area. That's their office. So there's certainly no hiding behind a locked door and a phone. If they've got an issue, they walk straight in. So it's in their best interest to maintain that community, to bribe them with all those barbecues and free drinks, etc., to keep them happy and entertain them. And certainly that was a big focus that I took away.
Well, the first community that we visited in Dallas, we went into their equivalent of the community hall. It was like the on-site office, where it had a couple of boardrooms, a nice kitchen for people to do, and like the place where residents would entertain. The community managers were all had their offices there, so they were in the thick of it all. And you might recall they introduced us to someone, I forgot what her title was, but she was basically a community liaison officer, which was the fancy way of saying she was in charge of entertainment and social functions for just that community. You know, so she'd be arranging the weekend barbecues, the quarterly, dining under the stars. Like, community and building that community in the neighborhood was really huge there. And they had people, that's their job. They would be that liaison officer to drive those events forward. So, Con referred to it as an entertainment budget. In Queensland, we just can't do that, can we? The body corporate funds can't be used, for example, to host a Christmas party for residents within the building. Adjudicators have said that's an unlawful use of body corporate funds. Whereas there, it was ingrained in their approach to community living that, of course, community funds would be used to facilitate the neighbourhood and those neighbourly relations. One of the other interesting things that we asked when we were on this tour, we got in through the bus, and it was just like any other street in a neighbourhood, and then they dropped us off at the front there. One of the first questions someone asked was, "Where are the gates? Why are there no gates?" The impression that we have of America, guys, is that everything's highly secure, barbed wire fence all over. But the impression I took when I was on the ground was it was very different in these neighborhoods. And the community manager explained that if they put up a gate, that essentially secures and makes the roads private. So the strata community then has to fund the ongoing maintenance and upgrades of the roads. Whereas if they leave them open, it's something that they contribute to a little bit, but the local government's fundamentally responsible for the upkeep of those roads. On to the next slide, if we could, Kirsty. Recreation was huge. That's the impression that I got. The photo that you guys see on your left was a 5-acre lagoon that was just there for the residents of one of these communities. Like, this thing was huge. It was absolutely massive, and it was pumping. We were there, was it a Monday or a Tuesday that we were there? And it was fairly busy on a school day, kids running all around, people just sunbaking, and it was a private facility. So, like, notionally, there were sort of like pool gates around the whole thing. And one of the first things I thought was, surely everyone in North Texas would just hang out at this place. But as we got in through the gates and we walked into the lagoon facility, there was a guard, for want of a better term, there was a guard at the door, making sure that only residents were coming through. The photo that you see on the right was from the other strata community that we visited, called the Lookout. They called it the Treehouse. And Simon, I think you remarked that it's the most expensive treehouse you've ever heard of. We asked what the construction cost was, and I think they said it was about 1.5 mil in US dollars. Yeah, Con almost had a heart attack when he heard that, because he knows the price of building materials intimately. But they were saying that didn't they have to go through 2 or 3 attempts to build this thing?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what contributed to the cost. But the interesting thing about it was the developer there just saw and had this vision that in the middle of the strata community, there would be this iconic recreational facility that people would talk about. So it wasn't just a tree house, if you get my drift. It was something that they had a vision about, that they'd center the community around. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, Kurt. I took a photo, the one on the left, I just found this interesting. This was at the entrance hall to one of the strata communities. Like, the idea that a body corporate, that one strata community would have a set of values for everyone in the neighbourhood that they'd live towards and they'd look to encapsulate. The photo on the right, there you can see a map of one of these strata communities, just to give you an idea of the size that it had. And you can see some relics or artifacts that are mounted up on the wall. And that's just something that I want to dwell on a little bit. One of the real differences that I sensed over in Texas was this really close connection to the land that they had. And the strata communities that we went to, before they were developed into residential housing communities, they were ranchers. And the developer was a rancher. Yeah. And like, one of the things that blew me away was how intimately involved the developer continued to be with these communities. The majority of the land had been sold and built, but when you were talking to the community manager about what happens here, what happens there, vision for this, vision for that, the community manager would be talking about the residents as much as they'd be talking about the developer and what the developer's wishes were and the vision that they have for the community and the ongoing connection. And the legislation over there, I think I asked the question, these communities had been going for about a decade, and they were so large that they were still trying to sell the balance stock. And I asked, what's the developer's ongoing role and entitlements in having their say on what happens in this strata community? And it was explained that under Texan law, the developer retains control of the body corporate until 75% of the stock is sold in that community. So that's not 75% of a stage, that was 75% of the entire development had been sold. When they hit that landmark, the residents and the owners get to put one member on the board. The rest would still be developer appointed board positions. And it isn't until they sold all of the stock that the board would be handed over to the residents and the owners. So like that floored me when you think about our approach to a developer's involvement and the skepticism that a lot of people have in the Queensland market. Whereas over in Texas, it was like, well, it's their ranch. It's almost like you're just renting to be on their ranch, and the developer's going to be around until they sell the last piece of stock. And some of the people that I was talking to on the study tour and we were remarking on this, a lot of people just gave a different perspective that I found quite interesting. And it was like, well, of course the developer should still have a huge say on what's happening in that strata community right up until the moment they sell that very last lot. Because until they do, they're still a massive stakeholder and they're invested in making sure that people actually want to be a part of that community. Otherwise, they're not going to sell the balance of the stock. So is that the impression that you guys got as well, Simon and Con?
Yeah, certainly, Jason. I think, you're saying it's the ranch and the connection to the land. I think for those of us that have all watched a very famous TV show out there. There's probably one ranch that they don't want to start developing. They'll find a few things that have been dropped off at the train station, but certainly, the relics in the background there is that attachment and there is that community, and I think that's because they are connected to the land.
Yeah, and I think it was made clear to us also, the owner or original owners, wanted that sense of ranch style environment. There's a lot of history there, and they wanted to keep that theme or keep that purpose alive. And even the photo there, your values, and we talked about before around a sense of community, and those values instilled into the residents, the new people coming in and buying into the neighborhood or the community. So they try and keep the integrity of the area, which was really evident when we walked around. So
yeah.
And look, and just to add to that, like you see the size of that plan. I think from memory, it's an 8 or 9 year plan. There's a lot of land there, so they're staged. They're staged developments, and so that to completely to get it 100% full, I think they were envisaging around about an 8 year, 9 year plan to fully occupy the piece there. So they are big. It's not a parcel of land with 20 lots on it like we have here. Majority of ours are like that. They go for years, and they continually, in some areas like in Vancouver, the one that there's still old houses in amongst that neighborhood, which one day will be bought by the developer and redeveloped into either a condo or a community.
Yeah, so Kurt, looking at the time, did we want to field any questions?
Yep. If anybody does have any questions for the guys, now's your opportunity to pop them into the Q&A or the chat, or alternatively just raise your hand and I can take you off mute.
Of course, Michael's got a question.
Yeah. There we go. Feel free to chat, Michael. Michael, do you have a question? Looks like Michael might be having some technical difficulties. Anybody else have any questions at all?
What was your favourite restaurant at Dallas, Simon?
I actually didn't go to any restaurants in Dallas, Jason. I was back in the hotel room studying and reading from the conference.
So room service then, the room service.
No, Whole Foods. We went to Whole Foods and got foods to take back to the room.
Oh.
Okay, we do have one question on the Q&A. Alicia's wanting to know, do these communities also incorporate commercial properties?
The ones that we went to, I didn't see any commercial there, and I thought they'd be out of sync with what they were going for. But when I was walking around Dallas and indeed other cities, particularly around California, some of the buildings, did have that standard sort of resi on top, commercial retail on the bottom.
I think that was an interesting point, Jason, that I took from Dallas. Dallas doesn't have a high street. Dallas doesn't have a street of restaurants or a boardwalk of restaurants. If you want to get around, you've got to Uber it. There's little or no public transport. And if you were looking for a restaurant, of course, which I didn't, Jason, but if you were looking, you would have to get into an Uber and drive to a building and then go to that commercial area under that building where that restaurant may have been. Or for instance, the Whole Foods I mentioned before, that was at the bottom of a residential building as well. And there was sort of the new Dallas and the old Dallas. It was disappointing that we didn't see any cowboy hats, or we only saw one set of cowboy boots, and they were on Jason. So that's a bit of a myth about Dallas. You certainly don't see them walking around with cowboy boots and hats, but definitely a difficult town to get around, which is probably why those communities are being built right on the outskirts.
I also think it depends on the area of Texas or Dallas that you get to as to whether the cowboy boots are prolific or not. I certainly know that when I went to Fort Worth to see a rodeo, there were a few cowboy boots and cowboy hats there, Simon, but it seems as though you can find your visit of Dallas to the hotel, Whole Foods, and just a short bus trip. All right.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening to us.
Thanks for having us.
I thought it was very interesting, the stuff that you guys were saying. So I got a lot out of it, and I hope the other people online also did. We will be looking to have lunch and learns at least once to two times a month. So please keep your eye out for those. They are free opportunities for members and non-members alike to register and hear perspectives and topics, everything Strata. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see everybody hopefully at the golf day tomorrow.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.